Black Ops 7's mysterious new villain, the Great Voice, aka the Warden, is shaping up to be a very pivotal character moving forward in the Black Ops 7 zombie storyline. And I believe he may just be the key to some of the biggest questions and secrets we've had surrounding the Dark Ether story, Liberty Falls and JOSIAH SHEM. All of this starts with a very small hint inside of Ashes of the Dam's intel. So in this video I want to discuss the backstory of the Warden hinted at inside of the intel, relations to real world history I believe we were meant to find, and how that ultimately ties back to JOSIAH SHEM and the mysterious SHEM device. All of that and more will be discussed in this video, potentially re-involving time travel, so stay tuned. Before we can begin to understand some of the deeper implications of the Warden's history, we need to make sure we have a solid understanding of the story we are given for him in Ashes of the Dam's intel. The story begins in Ashwood. In the waning days of January 1865, the remote town of Ashwood in southern Georgia stood as a makeshift Confederate stronghold amid the Confederacy's final death throes. While many residents of the town were relatively neutral civilians, wartime strategy had meant the Confederacy now used the town as a makeshift stronghold. Devastated by recent bloodbaths at Franklin and Nashville, and with Sherman's legions having ravaged the state en route to Savannah, the South clung to futile hopes of resistance. Ashwood brimmed with nearly 8,000 horses for artillery, batteries, and cavalry units. Its dusty streets and modest church steeples transformed into a tense staging ground where ragged grey soldiers mustered for one last defiant push against the encroaching Union forces. The Child's Diary entry from January 27, 1865 perfectly captures the arrogance and denial that doomed Ashwood right before the massacre. January 27, 1865. The northern aggressors a day's march away, but Daddy still insists that we will be safe. He and the other men ignore the signs. Folks are shuttering their windows and barring the doors, convinced they will weather the advancing enemy by simply choosing to ignore it. Nothing is being done to prepare for the battle to come. Their arrogance will be the death of Ashwood. And we'll hear next that arrogance came from Ashwood's own elite, who betrayed their own to save themselves.
I'm sorry. What was that? How could I betray you? Well, I gotta say, it was real easy. There weren't ever gonna be no other way. I was always gonna fan your obsession, get that ember to flare. Whatever it took to bring that plump, hypocritical liar's soul to me. No, this weren't no betrayal. You brung this on yourself. Shit, son. You don't even know what betrayal is. You see, this place, this is where it all began. Ashwood. This is where our leaders, our best men, showed their true colors. These weren't no loyal grays, no proud butternuts. They was yellow. The kind that bleeds buttercups and sunflowers. Ashwood weren't no garrison town. It's just a bunch of hayseeds, church folk. We was using it to marshal our forces, near 8,000 head of horse, split between battery and cavalry, and all about set to march against the northern aggressors. Now, this was the start of '65. The writing was on the wall. Jeb was dead. We'd taken a real beating at Franklin. We weren't dumb enough to believe we was gonna turn no tide, but we sure was gonna give them blue bellies a bloody nose on our way to hell. So, imagine our surprise when a scout comes screaming into town like he's got the devil on his tail, hollering that the Northerners were a day out and riding our way. Well, come dawn, we ride out to meet him. Except something's off. couple of miles out, the first of our horses began to drop. One by one, like death himself were riding alongside of us. They got real sick, and their hearts just give out. By the time them northers fell on us, they was all gone. We had no maneuver, no response. And their cannon shredded us like matchwood. And I ran. Boy, did I run. Had to evade the Yankees and then later my own, scouring the countryside, looking for those they branded cowards, deserters. But it didn't take no genius to figure out our horses had been poisoned. It weren't no northern tactic, and the locals didn't have the stones for that. No, we got served up like hogs by powerful men. Most like for whatever grace or favor they could salvage before our inevitable, inglorious, final surrender. You would know betrayal if it walked up to you and beat you square on the ass. There ain't no more wily a snake on God's green earth than the rich man afeard of losing it all. No matter what they claim their ideals are, self-interest is their only creed. Which is why, if you truly believe in something, you best be taking care of business yourself. Well, seems I've worked up a righteous hunger talking to y'all. Well, don't you worry yourselves. This won't take long.
After hearing that raw confession, everything starts to click into place. Ashwood, 1865, Confederate forces muster there with 8,000 horses, ready for a last stand despite many losses. But the town's powerful leaders poison the horses to appease the Union, dooming the soldiers to slaughter. This action would cost the lives of many of their own, but would likely win them favor enough to escape the war, forgiven and allowed back into the Union. The Warden, the sole survivor, flees branded a coward. Sometime after this, though we aren't told exactly when, both Ashwood and the Warden end up inside the dark ether. He rises by embracing betrayal's pain, turning it into power. Now he fans obsessions and manipulates people, as well as the Shadowsmiths themselves, to harvest souls, just like those elites did to him. Now let's zoom in on one line from that monologue that sent the entire community into a frenzy, the moment we heard it. The Warden casually mentioning that Jeb was gone. When I first heard it, my brain initially went to Jebediah Brown from Buried, because the name Jeb is obviously going to make Zombies fans think of Jeb Brown, and the old western setting of Ashwood fits, especially considering everyone was speculating the Warden himself was Jeb Brown before we got the launch. And honestly, that possibility still isn't completely off the table, considering the large amount of alternate versions of Ether characters we've seen so far on the map. An alternative Jeb Brown, who never met the Keepers and never invented the Pack-a-Punch, could have easily lived long enough to fight in the war, maybe even rode with the Warden's unit. Ashwood does feel spiritually connected to Purgatory Point in a lot of ways.
Welcome to Ashwood, site of a massacre so large they decided to bury the whole town.
So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's impossible. And the theme for the map is even called Buried in Ashwood, which is why the Warden says at the start of matches that he's been referred to as a scourge or a deserter in the past.
Folk will call you a lot of things over the years. Deserter, zealot, scourge, sovereign, purify, and flame. It don't matter none. But if you need a label, you go ahead and call me Warden.
But once you line it up against real history, the reference points overwhelmingly to one man, Major General James Ewell Brown Stuart, better known as Jeb Stuart. He was the Confederacy's most celebrated cavalry commander, the literal eyes of the army for Robert E. Lee, famous for his plumed hat, daring raids and unmatched scouting ability. Stuart was mortally wounded by a Union pistol shot at the Battle of Yellow Tavern on May 11, 1864, and died the next day in Richmond at only 31 years old. That timeline slots perfectly with the Warden story. He explicitly places the Ashwood Massacre in the early 1865, the year after Stuart fell. No other Confederate Jeb comes even close to matching that specific death date and the emotional weight the Warden gives the name. Stuart's career at the time was seen as legendary. He led the daring ride completely around McClellan's army during the Peninsular Campaign, humiliated Union cavalry at Brandy Station in the largest cavalry battle ever fought on American soil, and screened Lee's movement so flawlessly that the Army of Northern Virginia felt blind and half dead the moment he was gone. One of his most famous actions, though, was the raid on Harper's Ferry in September 1862 during the Maryland Campaign. Stuart's cavalry, along with Stonewall Jackson's infantry, surrounded and captured the Federal garrison at Harper's Ferry, taking over 12,000 prisoners and huge stockpiles of weapons in what was the largest surrender of US troops until World War II. And here's where it gets deliciously zombies coded. Harper's Ferry is of course the exact same town that Treyarch rebuilt almost brick for brick as inspiration for Liberty Falls in Black Ops 6. The church, the heights overlooking the Potomac, the train tracks, everything matches. So in the Zombies universe, the historical battle of Harper's Ferry becomes the Battle of Liberty Falls. That means Jeb Stuart was almost certainly present in the Zombies timeline version of that fight, leading the cavalry charge that helped capture the town we all know as Liberty Falls. At first glance, the Warden dropping Jeb's name can feel like a random historical nod, especially when we are all still half expecting a Jebediah Brown twist, something that would feel far more consequential at first glance. But once you accept it's almost certainly Jeb Stuart he's talking about, the line suddenly stops feeling random at all. If the Warden rode in Stuart's cavalry, or even just served in the same theatre, then he would have almost certainly been part of the massive Confederate forces that surrounded and captured Liberty Falls in September 1862, the single biggest surrender of Union troops in the entire war. And then it makes so much sense why Carver and others reference the Warden being racist so much on Ashes of the Damned, because he was a part of the Confederacy. It's all but confirmed. So the Warden didn't just lose a friend at Yellow Tavern in 1864, he lost the commander who almost definitely fought alongside at the Battle of Liberty Falls 2.5 years earlier. That one line quietly stitches Ashwood and Liberty Falls together in the same war, the same army, and potentially the same man's memories. Which raises the obvious question we'll tackle next. Why does it matter? What did the Warden see, do, or lose at Liberty Falls that still haunts him enough to mention it a century-and-a-half later, inside a burning pocket of the dark ether? Before we connect those dots back to the Warden and Liberty Falls, let's take a quick detour into some foundational Dark Ether history that not everyone might remember. We are talking about JOSIAH SHEM, the enigmatic cult leader from Black Ops 6 Zombies' Shattered Veil. If you missed that storyline or need a refresher, Shem is one of those key figures whose action rippled out to warp time itself in the Dark Ether. His tale is a twisted blend of colonial greed, occult rituals, and unintended cosmic catastrophe, and it all ties back to the very soil of the Liberty Falls. I'll play the intel now.
Lundberg, PhD thesis research log, recording 5, February 4th, 1979. I'm pleased to report I finally have a complete timeline of my excavation site at the estate. No thanks to Patty over at Liberty Falls Archival Library, who gave me the runaround for weeks due to her record mismanagement. Bless her heart, I was able to retrieve what I needed. So, 1770, JOSIAH SHEM takes the land from the natives with brute force and builds like crazy. He procures hundreds of followers who, along with himself, all mysteriously disappear in 1810. Oh, note that I will be conducting a separate and thorough deep dive into SHEM. 1815, a descendant of a president is gifted the house. Over the next 100 years or so, a slew of fat cats snap up the house, most notable, a steel tycoon. His campaign against a labor union got him murdered in his bed by an angry mob. There's also this bootlegger, Fats Malloy, whose party got shot up by the feds in 1923. The place has been empty since the mid-70s when nuclear plant owner Sam Colton was assassinated by the widow of his dead employee. Now, people say this place is haunted or cursed. I think big houses attract rich assholes, and sometimes they get what's coming to them. However, Shem and his flock disappearing, that one does give me pause.
It starts in 1770, when Josiah Shem and his ragtag band of cultists rolled into the misty hills of Appalachia near what would become Liberty Falls. Armed with a forged property deed, they strong-armed a native tribe out of their land and sacred sites. This included the ancient Serpent Mound, a ceremonial shrine centered around a grotesque statue of an ether worm, and most crucially, the Horned Key, a carved antler talisman infused with dark ether energies. The tribe had used this key for generations to commune with their god of death, whispering prayers around the veil for guidance and power. But Shem, he saw it as his golden ticket to cheating the grave. Convinced the Horned Key held the secret to immortality, he claimed it all for his glowing flock, building a sprawling mansion right on top of the mound, complete with lush gardens and a stone henge. Over the next 4 decades, Shem's cult ballooned to hundreds of devoted followers, turning the isolated estate into a self-sustaining fortress of fanaticism. The locals in nearby Liberty Falls weren't buying it, though. They scorned the groups as heretics, whispering about midnight chants and blood-soaked altars. Shem didn't care. He was laser-focused on his endgame. By 1810, with the stars aligning just right, Aldebaran rising, and Taurus fixed in the sky, he gathered his cult for one final, desperate ritual. Notice here that 2 key things Shem calls out as being important for his ritual are the locations of Aldebaran and Taurus, 2 constellations. Keep this in mind, we'll return to it. Cloaked in the robes that wouldn't look out of place in the ancient order from the Chaos storyline, Shem invoked what he called the Great Voice from Beyond, and the Deathless One, his words etched into the halls of the mansion forever. I'll play that intel now.
Behold, brothers and sisters, Aldebaran rises! Blessed Taurus turns its mighty eye to witness our supplications. Rejoice, for we shall be the eternal guardians of a new garden that shall flourish, yea, unto all the ends of the earth. Great voice from beyond, hear your servants. May our prayers transcend the gulf between worlds. Hear us, Deathless One. We stand ready, fulfill thine dark, unholy covenant. Beuta she no moreta. Beuta she no more lu. Beuta
what happened next was apocalypse on a quantum scale. The ritual backfired spectacularly, shattering space-time like a dropped mirror. The entire cult, hundreds of souls, vanished in an instant, sucked into a fractured liminal space within the mansion itself, potentially becoming the disciples since they now are wearing the Chaos Storyline robes from Shad Vale onwards. Shem's spirit got the worst of it, trapped in an endless looping torment. There he remains to modern day, a ghostly apparition wandering the echoing halls of what locals later dubbed Shem's Folly, forever searching for the horned key that slipped from his grasp. The key, by the way, ended up locked away in a safe by none other than Edward Richtofen in the late 1980s, when Project Janus turned the mansion into a research hub for the Synaptic Algorithm Module, or SAM for short. Fast forward to February 28th, 1991, and the Ex-Requiem crew, picking up the pieces after Cold War, broke back into Shem's Folly. Their goal, snatch the horned key to finally free Shem's restless spirit as one of the three necessary to harvest the prima materia, the raw primordial energy pooling in his liminal prison. They succeeded, empowering the Sentinel artifact to punch back against Dark Ether incursions. But Shem's ritual did more than simply leave him trapped in a liminal space. It punched a permanent hole in reality. That space-time fracture became the blueprint for the time distortions we've seen rippling through the Dark Ether ever since. Echoes of events bleeding into each other, timelines folding, even the kidnapping of Ava in the future, which is the mansion years later converted into a hotel by none other than the Warden and the Shadowsmiths. Shem was more than a mad cultist chasing eternal life. He was the accidental architect of the Dark Ether's temporal chaos, all because he poked the wrong cosmic bear with the horned key and Shem device. So, what does a 200-year-old cult meltdown in the hills of Liberty Falls have to do with the Warden's grief over Jeb Stewart, or the burning streets of Ashwood? Why drag Shem into a conversation about Civil War betrayals and cavalry charges? Hold that thought. Remember when I asked you earlier to remember the fact that Shem called out two specific constellations, Aldebaran and Taurus. The teasers for the next map, ASTRA MALORUM, have begun, and along with seeing the intro cutscene, we have been given several marketing images. The trailer showed us the map is floating in space on a skull-shaped moon or meteor of some kind, with glowing red eyes and mouth, with the planetarium the map takes place in sitting on top. The teaser image shows advertisements for Thurston Planetarium, likely the name of this observatory, and we see some of the artifacts they have on display. Notably, one seems to be a 115 meteor like we see in the opening cutscene. Since Element 115 is back, I will have videos coming out before or after this one is live, talking more about that. Another is Shem's ritual knife, and another is a skull with constellations noted that the orientations of these constellations do not match any vantage point from which they could have been observed. All of this suggests not only that Shem is going to return to the forefront of the story once again, but we will see further connections between him and space, calling back to him mentioning constellations in his speech in Shattered Vale. But why bring Shem back now? I really didn't think we would hear from him again after his story was left largely inconclusive. Simple. I believe that Shem and the Warden likely share a very rich and interesting history. Firstly, we actually already know of some interactions that JOSIAH Shem and the Warden have had. Shem mentions that his contact in the Dark Ether is the Great Voice, a name also used for Panos' contact, who we now know is the Warden. This means that the person who led Shem's cult into committing the very actions they would shatter space-time with was the Warden, simply posing as the Deathless One Cortifex to Shem. And all along, it was the Warden speaking to Shem from the Dark Ether. And this is interesting because all of that happened nearly 50 years before Ashwood was ever massacred, and long before the Warden should have been in the Dark Ether. As at odds as this is, it matches a pattern we've seen with the Warden already. We discussed in some prior videos that he has very clearly interfered in the universe of Zarya Cosmodrome, even though it is the one that this new version of Nikolai is from, meaning it is likely pre-ending cutscene of Tag de Toten's universe and from the old Ether story multiverse. This would require the Warden doing some sort of insane time traveling that I'm not even sure would be possible for any characters from the Ether story even, and it is likely only possible due to the very unique and outside of time nature that the Dark Ether holds. This makes so much sense, because Guthrie's evidence on Terminus's boat said Janus were up to time travel, but all we see are the liminal spaces at the mansion, which are more like time bubbles than time travel in of itself, per se. That's because the SHEM device may be more powerful than we thought. And this, I believe, is our first clue into the larger plan of the Warden. It seems likely that during his time at the Battle of Liberty Falls, the Warden may have stumbled upon some of the secrets of JOSIAH SHEM. Whether it was one of those ancient ritual sites, perhaps the SHEM device itself, or even some gateway to the Dark Ether, it would plant a seed in the Warden's mind. And why we know his motivation is now to restore the old multiverse. I also think it's worth pointing out here, we are never exactly given the point that Ashwood is thrown into the Dark Ether, or exactly how that happened. Treyarch have left it redacted for a reason. Unlike the other points of interest, meaning it's special. We theorized and assumed before that the blood spilled from the massacre would be the cause. But there's a catch here. The Warden mentions having time to run and be branded a traitor for it, indicating the fall of the Dark Ether wasn't so immediate, even if the massacre is the root cause. All we know is that the Warden ran from the massacre and was branded a traitor, and by the next time we hear of him or Ashwood, the town is in the Dark Ether, and he has already taken control. I surmise that, with Shem's return inside of ASTRA MALORUM, we will learn that the Warden used what he learned at Liberty Falls to send Ashwood to the Dark Ether himself. This then allowed him to sacrifice the residents he had been betrayed by in much the same way he was betrayed, and begin his rise to power. Once he took a foothold of real power, he would return to Liberty Falls in the Dark Ether and spend time there. But how do we know that? It's actually a small detail that we've mostly overlooked until now. When we first saw the Warden, back in the ending of Modern Warfare Zombies in the mirror, he appeared as a silhouette inside said mirror in the hotel room of Liberty Falls, which is the very same mansion just renovated years later, before yanking Ava through and into the Dark Ether by the Shadowsmiths. But the interesting detail for us is where he is, the roof of the mansion in Liberty Falls, and considering this is the only time we have seen him other than the intro, where he comes to us in order to take the souls of the characters, I think it's likely he is using the Dark Ether version of the mansion as his home base. This would put him perfectly in line to speak with Panos from the church come the events of Black Ops 6. But if this is the case, why? And for that matter, why even talk to Panos? What was the goal there from his perspective? I think the reason he talked to Panos, and the reason he talked to Shem, and the reason he uses the mansion are all one and the same. During his time in the Civil War, he discovered some remnants of the weakest point in the dimensional veil on Earth, the mansion inside of Liberty Falls. This was due to JOSIAH SHEM and his cult's ritual in the past. And later, when at his lowest, the Warden would return to take advantage of this dark power, and in doing so, he crossed over to the Dark Ether in Liberty Falls rather than in Ashwood, and he drug Ashwood inside the Dark Ether as his first victim, and from there he discovered just how weak the veil was and how it seemed that even time itself here was fractured and malleable, all thanks to the ritual at the mansion. This would make the mansion ground zero for time travel inside the Dark Ether, and this meant that the Warden could now access different times to interfere, if only as a voice to someone. This led to his reputation as the Great Voice, where he spoke to many different people to influence their actions, including Shem in the past, essentially securing his own pathway into the Dark Ether in a self-fulfilling mini-cycle by encouraging Shem to shatter the barrier in the first place, just as he did to many similarly, such as Yuri Zavoyski from the Cosmodrome. And he did the same with Panos, encouraging him to worsen the Dark Ether infection on Earth and further weaken the barrier.
This is John Blanchard reporting my preliminary sweep of Liberty Falls since the loss of our strike team. It doesn't look like planet Earth out here. Something is taking over. The air is heavy, almost corrosive. It hangs on everything. I feel like I'm choking just standing in it. I can barely think. Liberty Falls is gone. It's a boiling pot of chaos. We have to stop it from spilling over. Fucking Panos. What the hell did he do to my team? And who the fuck was he talking to? It's like he's possessed. He's part of the chaos now, which means I have to stop him from spreading too. Motion-activated camera showed him arriving at Janus Towers right before it shorted out. Once I'm done here, I'll chase him down and put a bullet right in his crown.
This gives him more and more access to different places and times, as he pulls them into the dark ether and absorbs the souls of their victims, growing ever more powerful, all leading up to now, where it seems that he has gathered the final victims he needs to take hold forever. It's interesting to note as well that when the Warden allows Panos to see a dream of Ashes of the Damned, Panos already sees the Janus Towers there, even though this would have been prior to the events of Reckoning, and we know that they apparently fall into the dark ether post its ending cutscene, further giving us insight into the seemingly distortion in time here at Liberty Falls, showing that the Warden contacting Panos was already in a place in the future beyond the events of Reckoning.
The voice spoke to me again. The great voice from beyond. My friend. It guided me through a dream state more lucid than any I have ever known. It was more than transcendental. It was transformative. I saw through the mist and fog. My gaze did not linger upon the foul wretches that wandered in search of prey. I looked upon the sprawling landscape beyond. Though this place was shrouded by darkness and tainted by trauma, I saw lights. I saw brightness. From the fields I glimpsed a farmhouse, a sunken town, rustic and ravaged by age, a cabin overlooking the inky black water of a lake, and a pyramid somehow floating in the distance. A single tower still stood tall. Though I was alone, I knew no fear as I walked across this unfamiliar realm. When I felt a yawning hunger deep in my belly, the voice guided me towards a place of nourishment. My eyes feasted upon its saturated colors, and my appetite was swiftly sated. My thirst was soon quenched. I knew for sure this was so much more than a mere dream when I read the sign. My friend confidently issued a solemn promise. This land that once was will be restored, as will I.
The Warden has already tamed the Shadowsmiths, the ancient masters of the Dark Ether, and seemingly its eternal creators, so why does he need us now? As the entity says, each of us have been touched by some mysterious power. Carver guesses the Sentinel artifact, but so far we don't know that any of the new original four have encountered it. Whatever this mysterious power is that lies on each of their spirits, it seems to be the last thing the Warden will need to take power, considering there is essentially no one left above him in the Dark Ether if he has tamed even the Shadowsmiths. I suspect this last bit of power would allow him to return the multiverse, just as was leaked some time ago by Insider Gaming that his motivations are. But now this makes much more sense. Restoring the multiverse he's already had a very small taste of with limited access would give him infinitely more victims and therefore souls to absorb. For now, all we can do is wait until ASTRA MALORUM to see if this is the case. But I firmly believe we are on the precipice of a large connection between the Warden and JOSIAH SHEM, especially considering the exact time the Warden crosses over is explicitly left as a mystery to us for now. But what do you think? Was the Warden at Liberty Falls during the war? And do you think this is likely the source for his connection to the Dark Ether? Let me know your thoughts down below. But for now, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not here for some great Call of Duty news information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.